3 years. 3 perfect years with Tyler. And I was about to discover that my own mother had been orchestrating our entire relationship from the shadows. The anniversary dinner was supposed to be magical. Instead, it became the night I learned that love could be weaponized, trust could be purchased, and the person who gave birth to you could auction off your heart to the highest bidder. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Natalie, and I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just lies. This was something so calculated, so cold, that it made every kiss feel like a transaction, and every "I love you" sound like a scripted line from a play I never knew I was performing in. The champagne bubbles tickled my nose as I raised the glass, trying to ignore the knot that had been growing in my stomach all evening. Tyler sat across from me at Skyline Bistro, the city lights of Portland twinkling behind him, like scattered diamonds against the October sky. Everything should have been perfect. The reservation at our favorite rooftop restaurant, the carefully chosen burgundy dress that Tyler said made my eyes look like melted chocolate. Even the weather had cooperated with an unseasonably warm evening that let us sit on the terrace without shivering. But something felt rehearsed about the whole night, like Tyler was following a script he'd memorized too well. The way he'd insisted on this specific restaurant, this exact table by the window, even the timing of when he'd ordered the champagne. It was all too precise, too calculated for the spontaneous man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. "To us?" Tyler said, his smile not quite reaching his hazel eyes. "To 3 incredible years and to whatever comes next." I clinked my glass against his, studying his face in the candlelight. He was still handsome, still the same guy who used to surprise me with coffee from my favorite shop downtown, who would drive across town just to bring me soup when I was sick. But tonight there was something distant about him, like he was performing the role of loving boyfriend rather than actually being one. "Tyler," I said, setting my glass down carefully, "is everything okay? You seem different tonight." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Different how?" "I'm celebrating with the most beautiful woman in Portland. What could be wrong?" The compliment felt empty, like something he'd say to any woman sitting across from him. I forced a smile and picked at my salmon, the expensive meal tasting like cardboard in my mouth. Outside, a light rain had started to fall, droplets racing down the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows like tears I wanted to shed but couldn't name the reason for. The evening dragged on with stilted conversation and forced smiles. Tyler kept checking his phone, claiming it was work emails, but I caught glimpses of text messages that disappeared too quickly for me to read. By the time we made it back to our shared loft in the Pearl District, the tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I'm going to take a shower," Tyler announced the moment we walked through the door, already heading toward our bedroom without so much as a kiss goodnight. "Long day tomorrow." I stood in our living room, surrounded by the framed photos of our relationship that suddenly felt like evidence of a crime I didn't know had been committed. There we were at the coast last summer, his arm around me as we watched the sunset at Cannon Beach. There we were at my company's holiday party, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember. And there, on the mantel, was the photo from our first date at Powell's Books, both of us holding the same novel we'd accidentally reached for at the same time. Had any of it been real? The shower water started running, and Tyler's phone, forgotten in his rush to escape whatever uncomfortable energy had followed us home, sat charging on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a notification, and my heart stopped. Mom calling. Not Linda or Linda Brooks like you'd expect for someone's mother-in-law, just Mom. But Tyler's parents lived in Seattle, and his mother's name was Patricia. I knew because we'd had dinner with them just last month when they'd visited Portland. My hands trembled as I stared at the phone, the notification disappearing as quickly as it had come. Maybe I'd misread it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why my boyfriend of 3 years had someone listed as Mom in his phone who wasn't actually his mother. But my gut, that treacherous little voice that had been whispering warnings all evening, knew better. I glanced toward the bedroom where I could still hear the shower running and Tyler's off-key humming echoing off the bathroom tiles. Before I could talk myself out of it, I picked up his phone. My fingers shook as I swiped up, grateful that we'd shared passcodes months ago during a moment of relationship transparency I now wished I could take back. The recent calls list made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Mom, Mom, Mom. At least a dozen calls over the past week, some lasting over an hour. Mixed in between were normal calls to his coworkers, his gym buddy Marcus, a few restaurants for reservations. But those calls to Mom stood out like wounds against healthy skin. I scrolled down further, my heart hammering so hard I was sure Tyler would hear it over the shower. The calls went back months, almost daily conversations, some happening while I was at work, others during his lunch breaks, a few late at night when I'd already gone to sleep. Who was Mom? With shaking fingers, I opened his text messages. The conversation with Mom was at the very top of his recent messages. More recent than his texts with me. More recent than anything else in his phone. The shower was still running. I had maybe 5 more minutes before Tyler would come out, hair damp and smelling like his cedar-scented body wash, ready to slide into bed next to me and pretend this anniversary had been perfect. I tapped on the conversation. The first message I saw was from earlier today, sent while I was getting ready for dinner. "Tonight's the night. Are you ready?" Tyler's response. "As ready as I'll ever be. 3 years is a long time to keep this up." "Mom, you've done beautifully, sweetheart. She has no idea. Just remember what we discussed about the timing." Tyler. "I know. After the anniversary dinner, you're sure this is the right way to handle it?" "Mom, trust me, baby. I know what's best for everyone involved. She'll understand eventually." Tyler. "And if she doesn't?" "Mom, then we'll deal with that too. You're not backing out on me now, are you?" Tyler. "No, I'm committed to this. To us. To the plan. Mom, good boy. I'll see you both tomorrow for brunch like we discussed. Make sure she comes. This needs to happen in person." My vision blurred as I scrolled up, reading message after message that painted a picture I couldn't quite comprehend yet, but knew was going to destroy me. This mom person, whoever she was, had been orchestrating something involving Tyler and me for months, maybe longer. But it wasn't until I scrolled back to messages from over a year ago that the truth hit me like a semi-truck going full speed. "Mom, the Brooks girl is getting too comfortable. You need to pull back a little, make her insecure again." Tyler. "She's been asking about meeting your parents. What do I tell her?" "Mom, tell her they're busy. We're not ready for that level of scrutiny yet. Keep her focused on the relationship, not the family." Tyler. "Sometimes I feel bad about this, Linda. She really loves me." Linda. My mother's name was Linda. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the kitchen counter as the shower shut off. I stood frozen in the middle of my own home, surrounded by the debris of a life I'd thought was mine but apparently belonged to someone else entirely. Linda Brooks. My mother. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike, and helped me with homework, and held me when I cried over my first broken heart. The same woman who had been mysteriously absent from most of my relationship with Tyler, always too busy with work or social commitments to join us for dinner, always conveniently out of town when Tyler suggested meeting her. The same woman who somehow had my boyfriend's phone number saved as Mom, and had been talking to him daily for months about a plan that involved me, but that I knew nothing about. I heard Tyler moving around in the bedroom, probably drying his hair and getting ready for bed like this was any other night. Like he hadn't just spent the evening lying to my face while following instructions from my own mother. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to make it to the couch before they gave out completely. I sat there in the dark living room, city lights painting rainbow streaks across the hardwood floor, trying to process what I'd just discovered. Tyler and my mother. My mother and Tyler. They'd been talking, planning, coordinating something that revolved around me but excluded me entirely. How long had this been going on? How long had I been living in a relationship that was being managed by the woman who gave birth to me? And what was this plan they kept mentioning? What was supposed to happen tomorrow at brunch? What had Tyler been getting ready for all evening? "Nat, you okay out there?" Tyler's voice drifted from the bedroom, casual and warm like nothing had changed. "Fine," I called back, proud that my voice didn't shake. "Just getting some water," I heard him settle into bed, probably already scrolling through his own phone or setting his alarm for tomorrow. Tomorrow, when apparently something was supposed to happen. Something that had been planned and coordinated and discussed between my boyfriend and my mother, without my knowledge or consent. I sat on that couch until the early hours of the morning, staring at the photos of our relationship, and wondering how many of those moments had been genuine, and how many had been performed for an audience of one. Had Tyler really wanted to go to that bookstore on our first date, or had someone told him I loved to read? Had he actually enjoyed our weekend trips to the coast, or had those been suggested activities designed to make me fall deeper in love with him? Had he ever loved me at all? Or was I just the target of some elaborate scheme orchestrated by my own mother? As dawn started to creep through the windows, painting our living room in soft shades of pink and gold, I finally understood what I had to do. I couldn't confront Tyler, not yet. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I made any moves. I needed to dig deeper into those text messages. I needed to find out exactly what my mother and my boyfriend had been planning behind my back for God knows how long.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
And I needed to figure out why the woman who was supposed to love me unconditionally had apparently been manipulating my love life like some kind of twisted puppet master. The Tyler I'd fallen asleep next to every night for the past year was still breathing peacefully in our bed, probably dreaming about whatever tomorrow's brunch was supposed to accomplish. But the man I thought I knew, the relationship I thought we'd built together, the trust I'd placed in both him and my mother, all of that had died somewhere between reading that first text message and watching the sun rise over a city that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. I'd spent 3 years building a life with someone who'd been reporting back to my mother like I was a project to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. Tomorrow, I'd start tearing it all down and finding out exactly what they'd been building in its place. The game was over, even if they didn't know it yet. But first, I had to survive a brunch where I'd have to sit across from both of them and pretend I still didn't know that my entire adult life had been a carefully orchestrated lie. I'd always been good at pretending. I had a feeling I was about to find out just how good. The alarm clock's shrill cry at 7 a.m. felt like a death knell. I'd been awake for hours, curled on the couch with Tyler's phone clutched in my hand like evidence at a crime scene. My neck ached from the awkward angle, my eyes burned from staring at those damning text messages until they blurred together, and my heart felt like it had been fed through a paper shredder. Tyler emerged from the bedroom looking refreshed and handsome, his dark hair still damp from his morning shower. He wore the blue button-down shirt I'd bought him for his birthday, the one that brought out his eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was using my own gift to look good for whatever performance he had planned with my mother. "Morning, beautiful," he said, pressing a kiss to my forehead like he had every morning for the past year we'd lived together. His lips felt cold against my skin. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep?" "Just excited for today," I lied, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. "You mentioned brunch yesterday. Where are we going?" Something flickered across his face, so quick I almost missed it. Nervousness. Guilt. Fear. "Actually, I thought we could meet up with Linda. Your mom. She called last night and suggested we all get together to celebrate our anniversary properly." My mother had called him. Not me, him. "That's sweet of her," I managed, standing up from the couch and stretching like I'd just woken up naturally. "When did she call?" I didn't hear the phone ring. "While you were in the shower getting ready for dinner," Tyler said, already moving toward the kitchen to start his morning coffee routine. She seemed really excited to see us both. Another lie. I'd checked his call log. There hadn't been any calls during my shower time yesterday. The most recent call from Mom had been 3 days ago, lasting 47 minutes. Whatever brunch they had planned had been coordinated well in advance, just like everything else in this elaborate charade. I watched Tyler measure coffee grounds with the same precision he'd used to measure out lies for the past God knows how long. His movements were efficient, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this morning routine in his head. The way he kept glancing at his phone, the way he kept checking the time on the microwave. The way he hummed, slightly off-key while he waited for the coffee to brew. Everything felt performed. "What time are we meeting her?" I asked, proud of how normal my voice sounded despite the hurricane of emotions tearing through my chest. 11:30. At that new place on Hawthorne garden table. She made reservations. Of course she had. My mother, Linda Brooks, real estate agent extraordinaire, always had everything planned down to the last detail. She probably had our conversation topics mapped out too, along with Tyler's responses and the exact moment when whatever they'd been building toward would finally be revealed. I excused myself to shower and get dressed, needing space to think and plan. Under the hot spray, I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back since discovering those messages. The betrayal cut deeper than any romantic infidelity could have, because it involved the two people I trusted most in the world. Tyler, who I'd been planning a future with, sharing dreams of traveling together and maybe getting a dog, and eventually buying a house in one of Portland's quirky neighborhoods. And my mother, who I called every Sunday without fail, who knew my coffee order and my favorite movies and the exact words to say when I'd had a bad day at work. They'd been talking about me, planning around me, coordinating their interactions with me like I was some kind of experimental subject rather than a person they claimed to love. But why? That was the question that had kept me awake all night, cycling through possibilities that ranged from the merely hurtful to the absolutely devastating. Was this some kind of long con? Was Tyler after money? My mother wasn't wealthy, but she did well enough in real estate. Or maybe it was about control. Linda had always been particular about my choices, always had opinions about my friends, my job, my apartment. Maybe she'd decided that managing my love life was just another extension of her need to micromanage my existence. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something I couldn't even imagine because I'd never thought to suspect that the two people closest to me were capable of this kind of deception. I dried my hair and chose my outfit carefully. A simple black dress that Tyler had complimented before, paired with the silver necklace my mother had given me for Christmas last year. If I was going to sit through whatever performance they had planned, I wanted to look put together. I wanted to appear like the same trusting, naive Natalie they'd been manipulating, right up until the moment I wasn't. The drive to garden table should have taken 20 minutes, but Tyler took a route I'd never seen before, winding through residential streets that added an extra 15 minutes to our journey. He kept checking his phone at red lights, his jaw tight with concentration. "Are we running late?" I asked, though the dashboard clock showed we'd arrive exactly on time despite the detour. "Just want to make sure we don't hit traffic," he said. But there was no traffic. It was Sunday morning in Portland, and the streets were practically empty, except for the occasional cyclist and dog walker. Garden table sat on a corner lot, all exposed brick and reclaimed wood, with hanging plants cascading from the ceiling like a botanical waterfall. The kind of place that looked perfect on Instagram, which was probably exactly why my mother had chosen it. Linda had always been conscious of appearances, always concerned about how things looked to other people. She was already seated when we arrived, positioned at a table by the window where the morning light caught the silver streaks in her carefully styled brown hair. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a pale blue blouse, her reading glasses hanging from a delicate chain around her neck. She looked like every successful real estate agent in every home and garden magazine, polished and professional and completely in control. "Sweetheart." She stood to embrace me, her familiar perfume enveloping me in a cloud of jasmine and lies. "You look beautiful. That dress is perfect on you." She hugged Tyler too, longer than necessary, her hand lingering on his shoulder in a way that would have seemed maternal and caring if I didn't know what I knew. If I hadn't seen the dozens of text messages between them, the daily phone calls, the coordinated planning sessions. "Tyler was just telling me how wonderful dinner was last night," she said as we settled into our seats. 3 years. Can you believe it? It feels like yesterday that you two met. But that was wrong. My mother hadn't been there when Tyler and I met. She'd been out of town on a real estate conference, and I'd called her later that week to tell her about the cute guy I'd bumped into at Powell's Books. She couldn't know how wonderful dinner was unless Tyler had told her, which meant they'd talked about it, which meant the performance was already beginning. "It was lovely," I said, accepting a menu from the hovering server. "Very romantic." Tyler's smile looked strained around the edges. Natalie seemed to enjoy it. Not "she loved it" or "we had a great time." Seemed to enjoy it, like he'd been observing my reactions rather than experiencing the evening with me. My mother ordered a mimosa, Tyler asked for coffee, and I requested tea with honey, the same combination we'd ordered the few times we'd all been together before. But those previous brunches had been brief, awkward affairs, where Linda claimed to be too busy with work calls to focus on getting to know Tyler better. Now I realized those interruptions had probably been strategic, designed to limit their interaction in front of me while they maintained their secret communication behind my back. So Linda said after the server disappeared, "I wanted to talk to you both about something important." Here it was. Whatever they'd been building toward, whatever plan they'd been coordinating, whatever revelation they'd been preparing for months. I folded my hands in my lap to hide their trembling and waited. "Natalie, honey, you know I've always wanted what's best for you," my mother began, using the same tone she'd used when I was 16, and she'd explained why I couldn't go to my friend Sarah's party. Reasonable, caring, but with an undercurrent of steel that suggested disagreement wouldn't be tolerated. "Of course, Mom. And Tyler, you've been such a wonderful addition to our family. I can see how much you care about Natalie, and I appreciate everything you've done to make her happy." Tyler nodded, but his knuckles were white where his hands gripped his coffee cup. Whatever was coming next, he was as nervous about it as I was. "The thing is," Linda continued, "I've been doing some thinking about your relationship, about where it's heading, about what's best for everyone involved." My stomach dropped toward my shoes. She'd been thinking about our relationship? What gave her the right to evaluate and judge something that was supposed to be between Tyler and me? "I love you, sweetheart, but you've always been a little naive about people's motives, a little too trusting. And I worry that you're getting too serious too quickly with Tyler. Too serious. After 3 years. 3 years of building a life together, of sharing dreams and fears and inside jokes. 3 years of learning each other's rhythms and preferences and annoying habits. Too serious. Mom, I think Tyler and I are perfectly capable of managing our own relationship," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Are you, though?" Linda leaned forward, her expression shifting into what I'd learned to recognize as her negotiation face. The same expression she wore when she was trying to convince clients to lower their asking price or accept a less-than-ideal offer. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're planning a future with someone you don't really know." Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside me, his silence speaking volumes. Any normal boyfriend would have defended our relationship, would have told my mother politely but firmly that our business was our own. Instead, he sat there like a guilty child waiting for punishment. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on the table between us like evidence in a trial. "Tyler hasn't been entirely honest with you, honey. About his background, about his intentions, about why he's really with you." The restaurant noise faded into background static. Other diners laughed and clinked glasses around us, but all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears and the slow, methodical destruction of everything I'd believed about my life. "Tyler?" I turned to look at him, giving him one last chance to prove me wrong, to stand up and declare that whatever my mother thought she knew was mistaken. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's not what you think," he said quietly, staring down at his untouched breakfast. "It's complicated." Linda opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed Tyler, but not the Tyler I knew. This Tyler wore an expensive suit and stood next to a woman I'd never seen before, a tall blonde in a wedding dress, both of them smiling at the camera in what was obviously a professional wedding photo. Tyler's married Natalie, has been for 5 years. His wife Danielle lives in Seattle, where he goes every few weekends for work conferences. She thinks he's been traveling for his job. The photograph fluttered from my numb fingers onto the table. Married. Tyler was married for 5 years, which meant our entire relationship had been built on a lie so massive I couldn't even comprehend its scope. That's not. I started, but the words died in my throat, because looking at that photo, I could see the truth written in Tyler's guilty posture, in his inability to look at me, in the way he'd been checking his phone obsessively for the past few weeks. There's more, Linda said gently, pulling out another document. Tyler's been struggling financially. His wife doesn't know, but he's been borrowing money to maintain 2 households. He owes about $30,000 in credit card debt. My mother slid a printed email across the table. It was from Tyler to someone named Marcus, dated 6 months ago. In it, Tyler described his relationship with the Brooks girl and how he was working on a long-term solution to the money problem. He mentioned my trust fund, the money my grandmother had left me that I'd been saving for a house down payment. He's been planning to propose to you, Linda continued, her voice steady and clinical like she was presenting a business proposal. Not because he loves you, but because he needs access to your inheritance to pay off his debts and maintain his marriage. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Tyler's sudden interest in my finances over the past few months, the casual questions about my savings and investment accounts, his suggestion that we should consider buying a house together soon, his comments about how smart it would be to combine our resources, the way he'd been pushing for a deeper commitment while simultaneously growing more distant emotionally. "How do you know all this?" I whispered. Linda exchanged a look with Tyler, and in that moment I saw the truth of their relationship. This wasn't my mother protecting me from a con artist. This was something else entirely, something that made my skin crawl with its implications. "Because I hired him," Linda said simply. The world tilted sideways. The gentle murmur of the restaurant became a roar. The soft morning light turned harsh and glaring, and the taste of my tea turned to ash in my mouth. "You hired him?" "I hired Tyler to date you 3 years ago. I paid him to become your boyfriend, to make you fall in love with him, and to eventually propose to you so that you'd move back to Portland permanently and settle down, instead of chasing those ridiculous dreams about traveling and freelancing. My mother had hired my boyfriend. She'd purchased my relationship like a service, like hiring someone to paint her house or fix her car. She'd bought and paid for 3 years of my emotional life. The marriage thing, that was his own side project," Linda continued, as if discussing the weather. "I didn't know about Danielle until recently. But honestly, it works out better this way. You can't build a real future with him anyway, and now you'll understand why you need to come home and let me help you find someone appropriate." Tyler finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Natalie, I'm sorry. It wasn't supposed to go this far. It was just supposed to be a few months, just long enough to convince you to move back home. But then it got complicated." "Complicated?" I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor, drawing stares from nearby tables. "Complicated? You took money from my mother to pretend to love me for 3 years, and it got complicated?" "I do love you," Tyler said desperately, finally looking at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "That's the problem. It started as a job, but I fell in love with you for real, and I didn't know how to get out of it without losing you." "So you just kept lying? You stayed married to someone else and planned to commit bigamy rather than tell me the truth? The money I owed, my wife's medical bills, I was drowning, and Linda offered me a way out." "Don't." I held up my hand, backing away from the table. "Don't you dare try to make this about circumstances or necessity, or anything other than the fact that you and my mother decided to treat me like a chess piece in whatever sick game you've been playing." Linda stood too, reaching for me with hands that suddenly looked like claws. "Sweetheart, I know you're upset, but this is for your own good. Tyler was never right for you anyway. Now you can come home, and we can find you someone who actually deserves you." "Someone you approve of, you mean? Someone you can control? Someone who won't leave you stranded in some foreign country when you run out of money chasing fantasies. Someone stable and local who wants the same things you want. How do you know what I want? You've been manipulating my life for 3 years. You hired an actor to play my boyfriend. You don't know anything about what I actually want because you've never bothered to ask." The other diners were openly staring now, but I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see what happened when the people who were supposed to love you decided to rewrite your story without your permission. I'm your mother, Linda said, her voice rising with frustration. I know what's best for you. I've always known what's best for you. No, I said, grabbing my purse and backing toward the restaurant's entrance. A mother who knows what's best doesn't hire someone to break her daughter's heart. A mother who loves her daughter doesn't orchestrate an elaborate con game designed to manipulate her life choices. Tyler stood up, reaching for me. Natalie, please. Let me explain everything. Let me tell you the whole truth. The whole truth? I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. The whole truth is that you're a liar and a con artist, and my mother is your accomplice. The whole truth is that I've been living in a fantasy for 3 years, while the 2 people I trusted most in the world plotted behind my back. I turned and walked toward the door, my legs somehow carrying me forward despite feeling like they were made of water. Behind me, I could hear my mother calling my name, her voice sharp with authority and expectation. The voice that had always been able to stop me in my tracks, make me reconsider my choices, convince me to be reasonable, and think about the practical implications of my decisions. But not today. Today, that voice sounded like the enemy it had apparently always been. I made it to my car before the tears started, great heaving sobs that felt like they were tearing my chest apart from the inside. I sat in the parking lot of Garden Table, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, and let myself fall apart completely. 3 years. 3 years of believing I was loved. Of planning a future. Of trusting that the relationship I was building was real and honest and mutual. 3 years of my mother asking how Tyler was doing, pretending to be interested in our anniversary plans, acting like she cared about my happiness while she was pulling the strings behind every interaction. How long had they been planning this reveal? How long had they been coordinating the perfect moment to destroy everything I thought I knew about my life? And why now? What had changed that made Linda decide it was time to end the charade and drag me back under her control? My phone buzzed with text messages, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. Tyler apologizing, probably, or my mother explaining why this had all been necessary for my own good. I turned off the phone and drove home to the apartment I'd shared with a stranger, to collect my things and figure out how to rebuild a life that had been built on lies. The loft felt like a crime scene when I walked through the door. Everything looked the same, but it all felt contaminated now. The photos of us together, the furniture we'd picked out as a couple, the kitchen where Tyler made coffee every morning while we talked about our plans for the day. It was all evidence of an elaborate performance that I'd been too trusting to see through. I started packing mechanically, folding clothes, unwrapping breakables and newspaper, trying not to think about how many of our shared possessions were things Tyler had probably suggested we buy together as part of his instructions from Linda. Had she told him what kind of furniture I'd like? Had she coached him on my preferences and interests so he could play the perfect boyfriend more convincingly? By evening, I had 3 suitcases packed and a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't going to go crawling back to my mother's house so she could comfort me through the heartbreak she'd orchestrated. I wasn't going to let her use this moment of vulnerability to pull me back into her orbit and resume her management of my life choices. I was going to disappear. Not forever, not dramatically, but long enough to figure out who I actually was when I wasn't being manipulated by the people who claimed to love me. Long enough to remember what I'd wanted before Linda decided I was dreaming too big and hired someone to anchor me to Portland. I'd always wanted to travel, to work remotely as a freelance graphic designer, to see the world beyond the Pacific Northwest. Linda had dismissed those dreams as impractical and immature, but maybe that was because she'd known she couldn't control me if I left her sphere of influence. Maybe it was time to find out who Natalie Brooks really was when she wasn't playing the role of dutiful daughter or grateful girlfriend in someone else's story. I left Tyler a note on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker where I knew he'd see it first thing in the morning. It was short and simple. Don't contact me. Don't have Linda contact me. I need time to figure out how much of my life has been real. Then I loaded my car and drove north toward Seattle, toward the airport, toward whatever version of myself I might discover when I was finally free to make my own choices without anyone else's input or interference. The highway stretched ahead of me like a question mark, and for the first time in 3 years, I was the only one who got to decide what the answer would be. The rental car smelled like vanilla air freshener and other people's secrets. I'd been driving for 6 hours, putting as much distance between myself and Portland as possible, when my phone finally ran out of battery. The blessed silence that followed felt like the first honest moment I'd experienced in days. I pulled into a roadside motel somewhere outside of Sacramento, the kind of place with neon vacancy signs and rooms that rented by the hour or the week. The clerk behind bulletproof glass looked like he'd seen everything and cared about none of it, which made him perfect for my current need to exist without questions or explanations. Room 247 had orange shag carpet and a bedspread that had probably been installed during the Carter administration, but it had something Tyler and I had never truly shared: complete honesty. The dingy walls hadn't been painted to hide anything, the scratched furniture wasn't trying to impress anyone, and the flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom wasn't pretending to be romantic mood lighting. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and finally allowed myself to charge my phone. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree of missed calls, voicemails, and text messages. 23 missed calls from Tyler, 15 from Linda. Even a few from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably Linda's real estate colleagues, or Tyler's friends who'd been recruited into whatever damage control campaign they'd launched. I scrolled through the text messages first, morbid curiosity getting the better of my exhaustion. Tyler had sent a novella's worth of explanations, apologies, and desperate pleas for understanding. The messages started contrite and grew increasingly frantic as the hours passed. Please come home so we can talk about this like adults. I know you're hurt, but running away isn't going to solve anything. Linda is worried sick about you. This is dangerous, Natalie. You don't know how to be alone like this. That last message made my skin crawl. You don't know how to be alone like this. Like I was some helpless child who couldn't function without their guidance and protection. Like the past 3 years of living independently, managing my own career and finances and daily life, had all been an illusion, enabled by their careful management behind the scenes. Maybe it had been. Linda's messages followed a different pattern. They started maternal and concerned, shifted to frustrated and demanding, and finally settled into cold disappointment. You're being dramatic and childish. Tyler made a mistake, but he loves you. Come home immediately. We need to discuss your future. Your behavior is embarrassing to the entire family. If you don't call me back by midnight, I'm filing a missing persons report. I checked the timestamp on that last message. 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes ago. Linda wasn't bluffing about the missing persons report. She'd use whatever tools necessary to maintain control, including involving law enforcement in her efforts to track me down and drag me back into compliance. The voicemails were worse than the texts. I could hear Tyler crying in the background of his messages, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine remorse. But remorse for what? For taking money to manipulate me, or for getting caught? For lying to me for 3 years? Or for the inconvenience of having his elaborate deception exposed? Linda's voicemails were crisper, more businesslike. She'd shifted into crisis management mode, this same tone she used when a real estate deal was falling apart, and she needed to salvage what she could from the wreckage. Natalie, honey, I know you feel betrayed, but you're not thinking clearly. Tyler made some poor choices, but the core of what I did was out of love for you. Call me back so we can fix this situation before it gets any worse. Fix this situation, not repair our relationship or earn your forgiveness. Fix this situation, like I was a problem to be solved, rather than a person whose trust had been shattered by the people who claimed to love me most. I turned the phone off again and walked to the motel's vending machines, feeding crumpled dollar bills into slots until I had enough candy bars and potato chips to constitute dinner. The ice machine hummed and rattled like it was on its last legs, but it produced enough cubes to fill the cheap plastic bucket from my room. Back in room 247, I spread the contents of my purse across the orange bedspread and took inventory of my resources. Credit cards that Linda didn't have access to, thank God for small mercies, and my stubborn insistence on maintaining financial independence. My laptop with 3 freelance design projects in various stages of completion. The business cards of 2 potential clients I'd met at a networking event last month. A thumb drive with my portfolio and resume. And most importantly, my passport. Current, valid, and completely unknown to Linda, who still thought I'd abandoned my travel dreams in favor of settling down with Tyler. I opened my laptop and started researching flights out of the country. Something far enough away that Linda couldn't easily follow, somewhere I could work remotely and rebuild my sense of self without constant interference from the people who'd spent 3 years writing my story for me. Barcelona caught my attention first. Reasonable cost of living, strong Wi-Fi infrastructure, a thriving community of digital nomads and freelance creatives. I could rent a small apartment, take on remote design work, and disappear into a city where no one knew my mother or cared about my relationship status. But as I scrolled through apartment listings and visa requirements, another option kept nagging at me. Something that would hurt Linda more than simple geographical distance ever could. My cousin Jenna lived in Austin, working as a documentary filmmaker and living the exact kind of creative, unconventional life that Linda had always dismissed as impractical and irresponsible. Jenna, who Linda barely tolerated at family gatherings because she was 32 and unmarried and chose projects based on passion rather than profit potential. Jenna, who had been cut out of the family communication loop years ago because Linda found her lifestyle choices concerning and didn't want her putting ideas in Natalie's head. I pulled up Jenna's Instagram account, scrolling through photos of film sets and art galleries and late-night writing sessions in coffee shops that stayed open past reasonable hours. Her most recent post was a video from a documentary she was editing about women who'd escaped controlling families and rebuilt their lives from scratch. The irony was almost too perfect to be coincidental. I found Jenna's phone number buried in my contacts list and stared at it for a long time before gathering the courage to dial. It was nearly 2 a.m., but Jenna had always been a night owl, and I was pretty sure documentary editing involved a lot of late hours and irregular schedules. She answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the hour. "Natalie? Jesus, what time is it? Is everything okay?" "No," I said, and then started crying, because admitting it out loud made it real in a way that all my angry internal monologue hadn't quite accomplished. "Everything is completely fucked up, and I think I need help." Jenna listened without interrupting while I told her everything. The anniversary dinner, the phone discovery, the devastating brunch revelation, my escape to this roadside motel, and Linda's threats to involve the police. When I finished, she was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Holy shit," she finally said. "Linda hired your boyfriend? Like actually paid him money to date you?" $3,000 initially, then $500 a month for 3 years. I found the bank transfers when I was going through Tyler's phone. "That's..." Jenna paused, probably doing the math. "That's $21,000. She spent $21,000 to control your love life. Plus whatever she paid for the private investigator who dug up all that information about Tyler's marriage and debts. Plus whatever other expenses were involved in orchestrating the whole thing. And Tyler just went along with it? For 3 years? Apparently he fell in love with me for real," I said, making air quotes that Jenna couldn't see but could probably hear in my voice. Which makes it better somehow, according to him. Jenna made a disgusted sound. "Right, because taking money to manipulate someone's emotions is totally romantic as long as you catch feelings during the process. Linda keeps saying it was for my own good, that she was protecting me from making bad choices about my future." "Protecting you from what exactly? Living your own life? Making your own mistakes? Having experiences she didn't pre-approve?" The relief of talking to someone who immediately understood the problem without making excuses for Linda's behavior was overwhelming. I'd been starting to wonder if I was overreacting, if maybe my mother's intentions really had been loving even if her methods were questionable. "Listen," Jenna said, "I know we haven't talked much since Linda decided I was a bad influence, but you're welcome to crash with me for as long as you need. I've got a spare room, and I'm between projects right now, so I could use the company. I don't want to impose, especially after dropping off the radar for so long." "Are you kidding?" Linda banned me from family events because she thought my unconventional lifestyle might give you ideas about independence and self-determination. Apparently she was right to be worried. I laughed despite everything, the first genuine laugh I'd had since discovering those text messages. "She's going to lose her mind when she finds out I'm staying with you." "Good. Let her lose her mind. Maybe she'll learn something about respecting boundaries and treating you like an adult instead of a project to be managed." We talked for another hour, Jenna filling me in on her work and her life while I gradually felt my nervous system settling back towards something approaching normal. By the time we hung up, I had a plan that extended beyond simply running away from my problems. I was going to Austin to stay with the family member Linda had worked so hard to keep away from me. I was going to take on freelance projects and build a career that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or financial support. And I was going to figure out exactly how much of my life Linda had been controlling beyond just my relationship with Tyler. But first, I needed to send a message that would make my intentions crystal clear. I turned my phone back on and scrolled through Linda's contact information until I found her work email address, the one she used for her real estate business. Professional, public, and monitored by her assistant during business hours. I opened a new email and typed carefully, editing and revising until I had exactly the tone I wanted. Linda, I received your messages and want to make my position clear. I will not be coming home to discuss my future with you. I will not be accepting your management of my life choices going forward. I will not be treating Tyler's betrayal as a minor mistake that can be smoothed over with family counseling and your guidance. You hired someone to manipulate my emotions and control my life decisions. You spent 3 years orchestrating an elaborate deception designed to keep me dependent on your approval and close to your sphere of influence. You violated my trust, my autonomy, and my right to make my own choices about love and relationships. This is not protective parenting. This is controlling, manipulative behavior that has damaged our relationship beyond repair. I am safe, I am financially independent, and I am perfectly capable of managing my own life without your interference. Do not file missing persons reports, do not contact my friends or colleagues, and do not attempt to track me down through credit card records or any other means. If you want to repair our relationship someday, you can start by respecting my right to space and time to process what you've done. Until then, consider this my formal request for no contact. Natalie, I read it 3 times, checking for any language that could be interpreted as an invitation for further discussion or negotiation. Linda was skilled at finding loopholes in conversations, at twisting words to mean what she wanted them to mean rather than what they actually said. This message needed to be airtight. Satisfied, I hit send and then blocked Linda's number, Tyler's number, and any other contacts associated with my former life in Portland. If they wanted to reach me, they'd have to respect my boundaries and go through proper channels rather than trying to overwhelm me with emotional manipulation disguised as concern. The next morning, I drove to the Sacramento airport and bought a ticket to Austin on the first available flight. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at California spreading out below me like a map of possibilities, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Freedom. Real, authentic freedom to make choices based on my own values and desires rather than someone else's idea of what was appropriate or practical or safe. Linda had spent $21,000 trying to control my life, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail. You can't manipulate someone indefinitely without them eventually figuring out what you're doing. And once they figure it out, all the money and planning and elaborate deceptions in the world can't force them to keep playing along with your script. The captain announced our descent into Austin just as I was finalizing the details of my first freelance contract with a small nonprofit that needed a complete brand redesign. Independent work for an independent life, funded by my own skills rather than anyone else's expectations. Jenna was waiting for me at baggage claim with a handwritten sign that read, "Refugee from family drama," and a grin that could have powered the entire airport. She looked exactly like I remembered from the last family gathering where we'd been allowed to interact unsupervised, all wild curly hair and paint-stained clothes, and the kind of confidence that came from living authentically rather than apologetically. "Welcome to Texas," she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like coffee and possibility. "Ready to figure out who you actually are when nobody's pulling the strings?" I shouldered my laptop bag and followed her toward the parking garage, toward whatever version of myself I might discover in a city where Linda's influence couldn't reach, and Tyler's lies couldn't follow. Behind me, my phone buzzed with another blocked call from Portland, another attempt to drag me back into a story I hadn't written and didn't want to finish. But I didn't answer. For the first time in 3 years, I had more interesting things to do than manage other people's expectations of who I should be. The real Natalie Brooks was about to find out what she was capable of when she stopped asking for permission to exist. Austin in October felt like permission to breathe. The heat had broken, but the sun still stretched across the city with generous fingers, painting everything in shades of gold that made even the most ordinary coffee shop look like it belonged in a travel magazine. Jenna's apartment sat in East Austin, a converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls and windows so large they functioned more like portals to the sky than conventional barriers between inside and outside. I'd been there for 2 weeks, settling into a rhythm of morning coffee on the fire escape, afternoon work sessions at various cafes around the city, and evening conversations with Jenna that stretched until the small hours of the night. We talked about everything except the elephant-sized question of what Linda and Tyler were doing back in Portland to try to reclaim control of the situation. That changed on a Tuesday morning when Jenna's phone rang during breakfast, the caller ID showing my mother's real estate office number. "Don't answer it," I said, but Jenna was already swiping to accept the call, her documentary filmmaker instincts apparently kicking in at the prospect of recording evidence. "Jenna Walsh speaking," she said in her most professional voice, simultaneously hitting the speaker button and pulling up her voice memo app. "This is Linda Brooks," came my mother's crisp, businesslike tone. "I believe my daughter is staying with you. And you would be calling me because?" Jenna's voice carried just the right amount of polite confusion, as if Linda's demand for information was slightly puzzling rather than completely inappropriate. "Because Natalie has been missing for 2 weeks and I have reason to believe she's with you in Austin. I need to speak with her immediately." "Missing?" Jenna raised an eyebrow at me across the breakfast table. "That's interesting, because missing implies that someone doesn't know where she is. But you just said you believe she's with me, which suggests you do know where she is, which means she's not actually missing." Linda's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke again, her voice had shifted from businesslike to barely controlled frustration. "Don't play word games with me, Jenna. Natalie left without telling anyone where she was going, she's not answering her phone, and she sent me an email that was completely inappropriate and hurtful. I'm worried about her mental state." "Worried about her mental state?" Jenna repeated slowly. "Or worried about your ability to control her choices?" "I don't appreciate your tone. Natalie is clearly having some kind of breakdown, and she needs professional help and family support to work through whatever crisis she's experiencing." I gestured frantically at Jenna, shaking my head, but she was already leaning forward with the focused expression she got when she sensed a story worth pursuing. "What kind of crisis?" Jenna asked innocently. She's been manipulated by her boyfriend into believing that I somehow orchestrated their relationship, which is completely ridiculous. Tyler and I barely knew each other before he started dating Natalie. The whole situation has clearly triggered some kind of paranoid episode. The outright lie was so brazen, so completely divorced from reality that I actually laughed out loud. Linda heard it. Natalie, honey, I know you're there. Please talk to me. We can work through this together, but you have to come home first." Jenna looked at me with raised eyebrows, silently asking if I wanted to take the call. I shook my head and made a throat-slashing gesture. "I'm sorry, Linda," Jenna said, "but I don't see Natalie here right now. Maybe she's out exploring Austin, or working on one of her freelance projects, or doing any of the dozens of things that independent adults do during their day." "Independent adults," Linda repeated, and I could hear the disdain dripping through the phone. "Jenna, you and I both know that Natalie has always been a follower, not a leader. She needs guidance and structure to make good decisions. This whole running away thing is completely out of character for her." "Or maybe," Jenna said slowly, "it's completely in character for the person she actually is when she's not being managed and controlled by people who think they know better than she does about her own life. I'm her mother. I do know better." "About what? About whether she should be allowed to travel? About what kind of work she should do? About who she should love? Since when is being someone's mother a qualification for making their adult life decisions?" Linda's voice went ice cold. "I can see that you're encouraging this rebellion, which is exactly what I was afraid would happen if Natalie spent time with you. You've always been a negative influence on this family." "A negative influence?" Jenna mused. "Right. Because encouraging someone to think for themselves and make their own choices is definitely harmful behavior. Because encouraging someone to abandon their responsibilities and chase fantasies instead of building a stable life is harmful behavior. Natalie had a good thing with Tyler, and instead of working through their problems like adults, she's running away to play bohemian artist with you. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I gestured for Jenna to hand me the phone. Hi, Mom. Natalie? Thank God. Sweetheart, I've been so worried about you. Are you okay? Are you eating enough? Do you have somewhere safe to sleep? The sudden shift to concerned maternal voice would have been whiplash-inducing if I hadn't spent 28 years learning to recognize Linda's emotional manipulation tactics. I'm fine. I'm eating well, I have a comfortable place to stay, and I'm working on several freelance projects that are going better than I expected. Quote, freelance projects aren't a career, honey. They're a hobby. You can't build a stable future on freelance work. Why not? Jenna's been supporting herself with freelance documentary work for over a decade. Jenna doesn't have a family to think about. You do. You have responsibilities here. What responsibilities? To you? To Tyler? To the elaborate fiction you two created to keep me under control? Linda's voice sharpened. That's exactly what I'm talking about. These paranoid accusations, this refusal to listen to reason. Tyler is devastated, Natalie. He's been calling me every day, begging me to help him find a way to apologize to you and explain what really happened. What really happened is that you paid him $21,000 to pretend to love me so I wouldn't move away or pursue the kind of life you disapproved of. That is not what happened, and the fact that you believe it shows how much Tyler's lies have damaged your ability to think clearly. The gaslighting was so blatant, so perfectly executed, that I felt a moment of doubt despite having seen the evidence with my own eyes. This was Linda's superpower, her ability to sound so reasonable and concerned that you started questioning your own memory of events. But Jenna was recording the conversation, and I had screenshots of those text messages saved on my laptop, and I wasn't the same person who'd sat through that devastating brunch 2 weeks ago. I saw the text messages, Mom. I read the conversation where you told Tyler to make me insecure again when I was getting too comfortable. I found the bank transfers. I have documentation of the private investigator you hired to dig up dirt on Tyler's marriage. You went through your boyfriend's phone without his permission, and now you're making accusations based on messages taken out of context. That's not normal behavior, Natalie. Neither is hiring someone to manipulate your daughter's love life, but here we are. Linda was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted to the tone she used when she was preparing to play her trump card. I understand that you're angry, sweetheart. I understand that learning about Tyler's marriage was shocking and hurtful. But I didn't create that situation. I discovered it and tried to protect you from getting in deeper with someone who was obviously using you. By paying him to use me in a different way? By giving him an incentive to stay in Portland where I could monitor the situation and make sure you didn't get hurt worse than you already were. The logic was so twisted, so perfectly Linda, that I almost admired the audacity. She'd reframed her manipulation as protection, her control as care, her violation of my autonomy as maternal concern. So you're saying you hired Tyler to protect me from Tyler? I'm saying I made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time. Tyler needed money, you were already involved with him, and I thought it was better to have him where I could watch him rather than letting him disappear with your heart and possibly your savings. Jenna was making frantic hand gestures, pointing at her phone where she was still recording. She mouthed the words, "Keep her talking." And the part where you told him to make me insecure when I was getting too comfortable? How was that protecting me? I never said that. If Tyler told you I said that, he was lying to cover his own behavior. I didn't hear it from Tyler. I read your text messages to him. Messages can be faked, Natalie. Screenshots can be doctored. Tyler was obviously setting up some kind of elaborate story to make himself look like the victim instead of the manipulator. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. Linda was suggesting that Tyler had somehow faked months of text message conversations, complete with timestamps and detailed planning discussions, in order to frame her for a conspiracy she was actively denying. Why would Tyler want to frame you? Because he knew I was getting suspicious about his real motives. Because he realized I was going to expose him eventually, and he needed a way to discredit me before I could warn you. Jenna leaned across the table and whispered, "She's really good at this." She was. Linda could weave alternative explanations and reasonable-sounding justifications, faster than most people could follow the logic, creating just enough doubt to make you question what you'd seen with your own eyes. But I wasn't most people. I was her daughter, and I'd had 28 years to learn how her mind worked. "If Tyler was the mastermind and you were just trying to protect me," I said slowly, "then why did he confess at brunch? Why didn't he stick to whatever story you're claiming he made up? Because you caught him off guard by running away and he panicked. He probably thought confessing to something smaller would distract you from figuring out what he was really doing." "Which was what, exactly?" "Planning to take your inheritance and disappear. Possibly with his wife, possibly with someone else entirely. The marriage certificate I showed you was real, Natalie. Whatever else you think happened, Tyler is definitely married to someone else." That part was true, and Linda knew it was the one piece of evidence I couldn't argue with. She was using that kernel of verified truth to make all her other explanations sound more credible. "So in your version of events," I said, "Tyler was planning to con me out of my inheritance, but you discovered this and decided to pay him $21,000 to stay in Portland where you could monitor him. But you never told me about any of this because you were protecting me from information that might have helped me make informed decisions about my own life? I was protecting you from information that would have devastated you before I could figure out how to handle the situation safely. For 3 years? These things take time to investigate properly. I needed to be absolutely sure before I made any accusations that could destroy your relationship if I was wrong." Jenna held up a piece of paper where she'd written, "Ask about the money," in large letters. "If you were just monitoring Tyler to protect me, why did the payments increase over time? Why did you pay him more money as the relationship went on instead of less?" Linda hesitated for just a moment, but it was long enough to confirm that she'd been caught in another lie. "The payments increased because Tyler kept demanding more money to maintain the charade. He was blackmailing me, essentially, threatening to disappear with you if I didn't keep paying him." "So you admit there were payments?" "I admit that I made some financial arrangements to keep Tyler in Portland while I investigated his background and tried to figure out how to protect you from his real intentions." The conversation was exhausting, like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall while someone kept moving the wall and insisting that Jell-O wasn't supposed to be attached to walls in the first place. Every answer Linda gave created 3 new questions. Every explanation she offered contradicted something she'd said 5 minutes earlier. But the recording was capturing all of it, and I was starting to understand that this phone call wasn't really about reconciliation or explanation. It was about Linda trying to regain control of the narrative, trying to plant enough doubt and confusion that I'd eventually give up trying to understand what had really happened, and just come home so she could manage the situation back to her preferred status quo. "I need to go," I said. "I have work to do." "Natalie, wait. We're not finished talking about this." "Yes, we are. We're finished talking about this until you're ready to tell me the truth about what you did and why you did it, without trying to rewrite history or blame Tyler for everything. I am telling you the truth. The fact that you can't accept it shows how much this whole situation has damaged your judgment." And there it was, the final gaslighting move. My refusal to accept her version of events was evidence of my impaired mental state, rather than evidence of her dishonesty. "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up before she could respond, and immediately turned off my phone. My hands were shaking with adrenaline and anger, but underneath those emotions was something new. Clarity. Linda wasn't going to admit to what she'd done. She wasn't going to apologize or take responsibility, or respect my need for space and honesty. She was going to keep spinning new versions of the story until she found one that got me back under her control. And if I kept engaging with her attempts at explanation, I'd eventually get lost in the maze of her manipulations. "Holy shit," Jenna said, stopping the recording. "That was like watching someone try to convince you that gravity doesn't exist while things are actively falling around them. She's really good at it, though." For a minute there, I started wondering if maybe I had misunderstood something. That's exactly what she's counting on. That's how gaslighting works. She throws out so many alternative explanations that you start doubting your own memory and perception. Jenna played back portions of the recording, and hearing Linda's voice without the pressure of having to respond in real time made the manipulation tactics even more obvious. The way she'd shifted between concerned mother, reasonable adult, and injured victim depending on what response she was trying to elicit. The way she'd mixed truth with lies so seamlessly that it was hard to separate them without careful analysis. "I need to document everything," I said. "All the evidence I have, all the conversations, everything. Because she's going to keep trying to rewrite history, and I need to be able to remember what actually happened." Good instinct. "And I think we should probably expect more contact attempts." That phone call felt like reconnaissance, like she was trying to figure out your mental state and how much you actually know. Jenna was right. Over the next few days, Linda's attempts to reestablish contact escalated in frequency and creativity. She tried calling from different numbers, sending emails from various accounts, even having Tyler call Jenna directly to ask if I was getting the help I needed for my paranoid episode. But she also tried subtler approaches. A package arrived at Jenna's address containing some of my belongings from the apartment I'd shared with Tyler, along with a note saying she thought I might need these things and she hoped I was taking care of myself. Hidden among my sweaters and books was a GPS tracking device, small enough to hide in a toiletry bag or the lining of a purse. An old friend from high school reached out on social media, asking casual questions about how I was doing and mentioning that she'd run into my mother recently, and Linda had seemed worried about me. When I looked closer at the friend's profile, I noticed that she'd recently started working for Linda's real estate company. Someone claiming to be a freelance client contacted me about a potential design project, but when I asked for references and examples of their previous work, the email address bounced back as undeliverable. Linda was mounting a comprehensive campaign to locate me, monitor me, and gather intelligence about my mental state and future plans. The Concerned Mother Act was just one weapon in an arsenal that apparently included surveillance, recruitment of mutual acquaintances, and attempts at digital tracking. It was both impressive and terrifying, the resources she was willing to deploy to maintain control over my life. But it was also clarifying, because it removed any lingering doubt about whether her behavior was motivated by love or by something much less benevolent. A mother who loved her daughter and was genuinely concerned about her well-being would respect her request for space and time to process a traumatic betrayal. A mother who saw her daughter as property to be managed would do exactly what Linda was doing: treat my autonomy as a problem to be solved through surveillance and manipulation. The realization crystallized something that had been forming in my mind since I'd arrived in Austin. I wasn't just taking a temporary break from my life in Portland to figure out my next steps. I was building a permanent exit strategy from Linda's sphere of influence. But that meant I needed to be smarter and more strategic about how I handled her ongoing attempts at contact and control. Running away had bought me time and space, but it hadn't solved the underlying problem. Linda would keep escalating until she either got me back under her control or found a way to discredit me so thoroughly that my resistance didn't matter. I needed help from someone who understood manipulation tactics and had experience dealing with people like Linda. Someone who could help me build a strategy that went beyond simply avoiding her phone calls and hoping she'd eventually give up. Jenna knew exactly who to call. Dr. Sarah Martinez had kind eyes and the most organized office I'd ever seen, with color-coded filing systems and motivational quotes positioned at precise angles on her desk. She specialized in family systems therapy with a focus on narcissistic abuse and manipulation dynamics, which made her exactly the right person to help me understand what I was dealing with and how to respond to it effectively. "What you're describing," she said after I'd played her portions of Linda's phone calls and shown her screenshots of the tracking attempts, "is a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond normal parental concern. Your mother is engaging in what we call coercive control, using surveillance, isolation tactics, and reality distortion to maintain power over your life choices." Sitting in that calm professional space with someone who could name what was happening to me felt like being handed a map when I'd been wandering lost in unfamiliar territory. Linda's behavior wasn't just overbearing mothering taken too far. It was a systematic campaign of control that had specific patterns and predictable escalation points. "The good news," Dr. Martinez continued, "is that you've already taken the most important step by recognizing the manipulation and removing yourself from the immediate sphere of influence. The challenging news is that people who engage in this kind of behavior rarely stop just because their target has moved away. They typically escalate until they either regain control or face consequences significant enough to deter further attempts. Over the next 3 weeks, I met with Dr. Martinez twice weekly, while also working with a legal advocate she'd referred me to. Together, we developed what she called a, quote, comprehensive boundary strategy, designed to document Linda's behavior, establish clear consequences for boundary violations, and build a support network that couldn't be infiltrated or manipulated. The legal aspect was more straightforward than I'd expected. Linda's surveillance attempts, the GPS tracking device, and her recruitment of third parties to gather information about me constituted harassment under Texas law. The fake client inquiries could potentially be classified as cyberstalking. I had grounds for a restraining order if I chose to pursue one, and more importantly, I had grounds for a cease and desist letter that would create legal documentation of her behavior and my explicit request for her to stop. The psychological aspect was more complex. Dr. Martinez explained that Linda's need for control was likely driven by deep-seated insecurities and a fundamental inability to see me as a separate person with my own valid needs and desires. She'd been managing my life for so long that my independence felt like a personal attack on her competence and worth as a mother. The Tyler situation wasn't really about protecting you from a bad relationship, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. It was about preventing you from having any relationship that might pull you away from her influence. When you started talking about travel and freelance work, she saw that as a threat to her control, so she created a situation where your romantic partner was financially dependent on maintaining her approval. The scope of Linda's manipulation went far beyond just hiring Tyler. Dr. Martinez helped me identify dozens of smaller control tactics Linda had used over the years. Discouraging friendships with people she couldn't monitor, steering my career choices toward options that kept me geographically close, creating artificial emergencies that required my attention whenever I started to develop too much independence. Even my relationship with Jenna had been carefully managed, with Linda gradually reducing contact between us until we barely spoke, all under the guise of family scheduling conflicts and geographic inconvenience. She's been managing your entire social ecosystem, Dr. Martinez said. Tyler was just the most elaborate piece in a much larger strategy. Armed with this understanding, I started building what Dr. Martinez called a counter strategy. Instead of simply reacting to Linda's attempts at contact and control, I was going to proactively establish boundaries and consequences while building a life that was genuinely independent of her influence. The first step was financial independence verification. Linda had always been involved in my financial decisions, offering advice about investments and insurance that I'd gratefully accepted as evidence of her caring and expertise. But Dr. Martinez suggested I audit all my accounts to make sure Linda didn't have any backdoor access to my financial information. What I found was sobering. Linda was listed as a beneficiary on several of my accounts, had co-signed on my first credit card, which gave her ongoing access to statements, and was the emergency contact for my bank, which meant she could potentially access account information by claiming to be concerned about my well-being. Changing all of this required multiple phone calls, notarized forms, and in-person visits to financial institutions, but within a week I'd created a completely independent financial profile that Linda couldn't monitor or influence. The second step was communication documentation. Every attempt Linda made to contact me, directly or through third parties, was recorded and logged with timestamps and details. Dr. Martinez explained that this documentation would be crucial if Linda's behavior escalated to the point where legal intervention became necessary, but it also served the psychological function of helping me see the patterns in her manipulation attempts. The pattern that emerged was both predictable and exhausting. Linda would start with concerned mother calls, escalate to accusations about my mental state, shift to attempts at guilt and emotional manipulation, then cycle back to concerned mother, with added pressure about family obligations and social expectations. But the most revealing pattern was her response to boundaries. Every time I ignored a call or didn't respond to an email, Linda's next attempt would be slightly more invasive or manipulative. She was testing to see what level of pressure would crack my resolve and bring me back into compliance. The third step was what Dr. Martinez called strategic transparency. Instead of hiding from Linda's manipulation attempts, I was going to expose them to the people whose opinions Linda cared about most: her professional network, her social circle, and the extended family members she'd worked so hard to control the narrative with. This was the part I'd been most nervous about, because it meant going public with information that could damage Linda's carefully cultivated reputation as a successful businesswoman and devoted mother. But Dr. Martinez reminded me that Linda had already gone public with her version of events, telling people I was having a mental health crisis and needed intervention. "She's already damaged your reputation in service of controlling the narrative," Dr. Martinez pointed out. "Strategic transparency isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the people in your life have accurate information about what's actually happening." I started with Linda's business associates, sending a carefully crafted email to the leadership of her real estate company explaining that Linda had been using company resources to harass and stalk me, and requesting that they ask her to stop using work phones and emails for personal matters related to our family dispute. The response was swift and more supportive than I'd expected. Linda's boss called me personally to apologize for the company's inadvertent involvement and to assure me that Linda had been instructed to handle all personal matters using her own resources and time. More importantly, the conversation revealed that Linda's behavior toward me wasn't entirely unprecedented. There had been previous complaints from clients about Linda's tendency to become overly involved in their personal decisions, offering unsolicited advice about everything from paint colors to career choices to relationship dynamics. "She's an excellent agent," her boss explained, "but she sometimes has trouble maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. We've had to have conversations with her about this before." The pattern of control and manipulation that felt so personal and specific to our mother-daughter relationship was apparently something Linda deployed more broadly when she felt someone needed her guidance and management. Next, I reached out to the extended family members who'd been receiving Linda's version of events. I sent a group email with audio recordings of Linda's phone calls, screenshots of her tracking attempts, and a timeline of her escalating behavior over the past month. The responses were mixed but generally supportive. Several cousins and aunts admitted they'd been uncomfortable with Linda's requests for them to reach out to me and report back on my mental state and whereabouts. My uncle David, Linda's brother, called me directly to apologize for not questioning Linda's story more critically. "She made it sound like you were having a complete breakdown," he said. "But listening to these recordings, you sound like the most rational person in the whole situation." The most significant response came from my grandmother, Linda's mother, who had been the source of the inheritance Linda was supposedly trying to protect me from squandering on travel and freelance work. Grandma Rose was 87 years old but sharp as a tack, and she was furious when she learned about Linda's manipulation campaign. "That money was meant to give you freedom to make your own choices," she told me during a long phone conversation that left me crying with relief. "Not to be used as leverage for Linda to control your decisions. If I'd wanted Linda to manage your life, I would have left the money to her instead of to you." Grandma Rose's support was the turning point, because Linda had been using the inheritance as justification for her behavior, claiming she was protecting family resources from my poor judgment. When the person who'd actually provided those resources publicly disagreed with Linda's interpretation of their purpose, it undermined the entire foundation of Linda's narrative. The final step in the strategy was what Dr. Martinez called proactive boundary enforcement. Instead of waiting for Linda to violate boundaries and then reacting, I was going to clearly communicate what behavior was acceptable and what consequences would follow if those boundaries were crossed. I drafted a formal letter, reviewed by both Dr. Martinez and the legal advocate, outlining exactly what I needed from Linda going forward. No contact except through written communication for a minimum of 6 months. No surveillance or tracking attempts. No recruitment of third parties to gather information about me or pressure me to reconcile. No public statements about my mental health or personal life. The letter also explained that any violation of these boundaries would result in immediate legal action, including restraining orders and harassment charges, and that continued violations would result in permanent cessation of all contact. I sent copies to Linda, her employer, and several family members, making it clear that this wasn't a private family matter but a documented legal boundary that other people were aware of and monitoring. Linda's response came within hours, and it was exactly what Dr. Martinez had predicted. An escalation that revealed the true nature of her motivations. She didn't apologize for the surveillance or acknowledge the boundary violations. Instead, she threatened to cut me out of her will, to spread rumors about my mental stability throughout our professional networks, and to make sure I understood the consequences of embarrassing the family with this dramatic nonsense. The threats were revealing because they showed that Linda's concern had never been about my well-being or safety. It had been about maintaining control and avoiding embarrassment when that control was challenged. But the threats were also liberating, because they made it impossible for me to doubt my own perceptions, or wonder if maybe I was overreacting to normal maternal concern. Normal mothers don't threaten to destroy their daughters' reputations when asked to respect reasonable boundaries. I forwarded Linda's threatening response to the legal advocate, who immediately filed paperwork for a restraining order. Within a week, Linda was legally prohibited from contacting me directly or through third parties, from coming within 500 feet of my residence, and from making public statements about my personal life or mental health. The restraining order was served at Linda's real estate office during a client meeting, which was mortifying for someone who cared as much about professional appearances as Linda did, but it was also effective. The contact attempts stopped immediately. 6 months later, I was still in Austin, still working as a freelance graphic designer, and still building the kind of life I'd dreamed about, before Linda decided those dreams were impractical and needed to be managed out of existence. I'd traveled to 3 different countries for work projects, developed a client base that valued my skills and creativity, and built friendships that were based on mutual respect rather than careful management and control. Tyler had tried to contact me once, about 3 months after the restraining order went into effect. His wife Danielle had filed for divorce when she learned about our relationship, and he was apparently hoping I might be willing to testify about Linda's role in orchestrating the deception. I declined. Tyler's legal problems were a consequence of his own choices, not something I needed to involve myself in. But I did appreciate the confirmation that Linda's manipulation had destroyed more lives than just mine. Jenna and I had grown closer than we'd ever been when Linda was managing our interactions, and through her I'd connected with a community of filmmakers, artists, and writers who understood what it meant to build a life outside conventional expectations and family approval. The inheritance from Grandma Rose had indeed allowed me to travel and pursue freelance work, exactly as she'd intended. But more importantly, it had allowed me to understand the difference between love and control, between family and manipulation, between protection and possession. Linda never acknowledged the harm she'd caused or expressed any genuine remorse for the elaborate deception she'd orchestrated. But the absence of her constant management and interference had created space for me to discover who I actually was when I wasn't performing the role of grateful, compliant daughter in someone else's story. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to be managed by people who can't see you as separate from their own needs and insecurities. Sometimes choosing your own life means disappointing people who've invested in keeping you small and controllable. But the life you build on your own terms, with boundaries you enforce and choices you make freely, is worth the temporary discomfort of disappointing people who never really saw you clearly anyway. The real Natalie Brooks, as it turned out, was someone worth getting to know. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.